another episode of Two Strike Noise. It's just your favorite. We're going to just go ahead and say that. It's a baseball history podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm one half of the show. And as usual, joining me from the Pacific Northwest arm of the Two Strike Noise Nation, it is none other than Mark A. Johnston. Sir, how are you?
I'm excited for today's show. Let me tell you, this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, a little bit different today. We're going to talk baseball. We're going to talk baseball throughout, but we're also going to talk some wrestling. And Mark, this is perfect timing because one, our guest has got a book that is coming out that has to do with wrestling. And also this weekend is WrestleMania.
WrestleMania.
The two-night event. I'm not,
yes.
This two-night thing's a little bit too long for me, but
I'll be watching, I got to say.
Well, I'm sure I will be too. I mean, Saturday night is on right during Hockey Night in Canada, so I'll probably have to have dual screens going, but I don't even know what any of the matches are.
Oh, I've actually been following lately, just so I could be ready for WrestleMania.
Yeah, I think that's what most kind of casual wrestling fans do these days. Although I think you're a little bit more than a casual wrestling fan, but I haven't even done that. Let's save the wrestling talk for a little bit later because we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. Let's talk about some baseball stuff here. First of all, Mark, to start out our BP segment, minor leagues are great. You've worked in the minor leagues. I've done some work with minor leagues. I love going to minor league baseball. I know you do too. They got to do stuff, though, to get fans in the gates. They can't just play the game and, it's not the top league, so you got to draw fans in. To do that, you have special promotions. I think we did a whole episode on special promotions. We did. It's all about marketing, man. Yeah, well, this is a new one. It's from the St. Paul Saints, who are now the AAA affiliate of the Twins. But remember, for a very long time, they were an independent team, I believe. And Bill Murray's owned them at one point, or part of them. And they're currently owned by Bill Veeck's son, whose name, I'm not going to lie, I forget. But who was actually, I think, the impetus, as we discussed, behind Disco Demolition. But Bill took all the heat because he was protecting his son, and he was ultimately the owner. Despite all that, let's get back to what I was originally saying. They've got a great promotion at one point this season. They've got Urology Day.
Nice.
I'm curious. I'm not going to lie. I guess I'm urologically curious as to what Urology Day encompasses at a minor league baseball stadium. But you remember when the Mariners had Jay Buhner haircut night way back in the day?
Yes.
Yeah. So you got in free if they shaved your head right there.
That's right.
What is the same promotion with colonoscopies or?
Boy, I hope not. I gotta say,
it's the minor leagues, man. Anything really goes there. Let's see. We also like food, right, Mark? You got to eat.
We both love food.
Yeah. So I don't know why, but I've just been writing these down. I've been seeing a bunch of before the season, especially a bunch of teams have been highlighting new food offerings at their stadiums. But not just food offerings, also condiments. Apparently at Fenway Park, they are now serving Heinz ketchup. I don't know what they were serving before, but it wasn't Heinz. Kauffman Stadium in Kansas City, they've switched from Pepsi to Coke.
Oh, wow.
This is big enough news that they're tweeting about it. So I felt like I kind of had to say something. Also, you can still, if you choose to go to a game in Oakland, which I beg you not to, you can still get an RC Cola there if you really want.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's the official cola of John Fisher. And that's not a joke.
Well, that makes it worse.
I know.
Now I don't want any.
That's not a joke. That is legitimately, RC Cola has been the official cola of the Coliseum for many years now. Yeah, I think it's probably the only thing keeping them in business at this point. Whatever. As you can tell, I don't really want to talk about what's going on.
Let's move on.
Let's see. Across the bay, though, I couldn't believe this. When the Giants opened the season, Michael Conforto, former Met, was the 18th different Giants opening day left fielder in the last 18 years.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's incredible. Just to think that at no point did they have somebody that started in left field on opening day and the next season did as well. That's crazy.
Man, I didn't know it was that many. I mean, the Mariners have an issue with left field, too. They had many left fielders, but 18 in a row, that's insane.
It's kind of like the drummer for Spinal Tap, right?
That's right. Exactly.
I think the last time, and I am just pulling this out, I thought I read it, but if I'm wrong, I apologize. I think the last time the Giants had the same left fielder for 2 opening days in a row was Barry Bonds.
That would make sense.
Yeah, because there was no DH when Bonds was still playing, so he had to play.
It may have been Stumpy Joe.
Stumpy Joe. Didn't they just cut Stumpy Joe down in Washington, D.C.?
There was some. No, he was a drummer for Spinal Tap. I got confused.
Oh, was that his name for real, Stumpy Joe?
Well, there was Stumpy Joe, and I believe there was Stumpy Pete as well. But there was a nice long list of drummers. The new Spinal Tap, Lars Ulrich will be the drummer.
Really? I've literally just learned about the Spinal Tap reboot. Is it a reboot or is it a sequel?
No, it's a sequel. 40 years in the making. I'm so excited.
You know, I'm excited, but I mean, the first one's so good and such a classic. I agree. There's no way they can
direct it. Everybody's back, so I mean, it's got real possibilities.
Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed. My hopes aren't high, and then that way they can't be dashed.
There you go.
How about that? There was a great article in The Athletic about a week or so ago about new Angels manager Ron Washington. I'm a huge fan of Wash. I mean, my old favorite team, you can understand why. But the great article about him, and, you know, we've touched on this as well, the major decrease of black players in the major leagues. Ron Washington, though, he's been around the game so long, he's really touched a lot. Just about any black player in the major leagues has a connection to Ron Washington in some way, and they were going through some of these players with him. Here's a great video clip I found of somebody that, you know, if I find a video clip about him, I'm going to play it.
Rickey Henderson, the legend. Rickey Henderson, I didn't play with Rickey, I played against Rickey, but I always respected Rickey, and I ended up being a coach in Oakland when Rickey came back for his last go-round. This is what I remember the most. We were in Cleveland. Kenny Lofton at the time was leading the league in stolen bases. Yep. And Kenny Lofton made a comment in the paper, there's a new guy in town now, that old guy needs to go home. He don't talk about Rickey like that. That's what Rickey said. He don't talk about Rickey like that. And guess who won the stolen base title that year in that league?
Guessing Rickey won it.
Rickey did, and he run it about 30-something stolen bases.
Kenny.
You don't talk about Rickey that way.
I mean, that's poking a bear. And Kenny, show some respect.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's just a silly thing to say.
Well, I mean, even at the end of his career, as somebody whose game is essentially patterned after Rickey Henderson, how can Kenny Lofton legitimately say that? That's just not smart. Maybe he was
silly.
He was young at that point. We'll say youth had something to do with it, because you don't make fun of Rickey like that. Wristband gate. Have you heard about this?
No.
Yeah, so I didn't want to talk about Oakland anymore, but there's some wristbands. The Last Dive Bar is one of the A's fan groups here in town that has been behind Fans Fest and the reverse boycott game. They've been one of the driving forces, and they have a lot of merchandise, one of which is those bands that you can wear that when you support certain causes, like Lance Armstrong.
I did hear about this. Yes.
Used to have that Live Strong thing before he became even a bigger idiot. So there's a claim that Brent Rooker and Estuary Ruiz, they wore these bands during games, and Rooker got benched and Estuary got sent to Hawaii, despite the fact he was hitting .426 to start the season. People were claiming it was pushback from the idiot at the top of the organization because they wore that. It's not true. I'm not going to stick up for John Fisher any day of the week. But it's interesting, though, because they have to come up with an excuse as to why they did it, because they sent Ruiz down to manipulate his service time so that he couldn't become couldn't look for a new contract for another extra year. Just typical stuff, but they can't admit that, so they got to come up with some excuse. This is something that is real, though, that is very disturbing. Mariners reliever Taylor Saucedo. I'm not sure. Saucedo. I bet they call him the Sauce, right?
I'm sure they do.
Yeah. He says he doesn't believe in Babe Ruth.
Believe in Babe Ruth?
Yeah, so we've had players not believe in dinosaurs. We've had players recently claiming that they think the Earth is flat. Taylor doesn't believe Babe Ruth ever existed because he says, quote, you only ever see one video of him trotting around the bases, end quote. Well, Taylor, you clearly haven't done a whole lot of research if you can only find one video of Babe Ruth. What, does he think everything else is AI generated? I mean, there's even a film of him supposedly calling his shot in Wrigley where you can actually see him pointing to the dugout and not to the outfield.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, bro. See, he's not a lefty, is he? I didn't look that up.
No, he's not.
Okay, if he was a lefty, I'd give him a little bit of leeway, but still not a lot in this situation.
Yeah, just for being a loopy guy. Yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. That's bizarre.
I don't know. What is our civilization coming to? Mark, do you play MLB The Show?
I do not.
I do. I think I've mentioned it a couple of times here. There's a bunch of things you can do, but one of the things you can do is you can create your own player. You can even scan your face and put your own face on a player and play up through the minor leagues and get the call up and all that stuff. Somebody made an entire roster full of George Constanzas.
That's awesome.
They don't have the right glasses, but he's wearing glasses. He is as short as you can make him and rather portly, which is similar to the character I usually create. He went ahead, and you can also change the ratings on these players. It's not a 20 to 80 scale like scouts use. It's just a 1 to 100. And he gave every one of them a 1 rating, which is the worst. But for one guy, I think he made him a two-way player, a center fielder and a pitcher. He made him a 99, which is the best you can get. And he simulated an entire season using this team. How do you think they did?
I would guess that they didn't do so well.
That's a very good guess. They ended up winning one game, which is honestly shocking that they won one game. They won 161-1. That one player did hit 47 home runs, and he was on the mound when they somehow grinded out a 1-0 win over the Red Sox in extra innings. It doesn't tell me whether he went the whole way or not. Oh, he did. He pitched a shutout.
That's outstanding, though.
But he based this off of the Seinfeld episode, The Contest, where he teaches Bernie Williams and Derek Jeter how to hit. It's just simple physics. That's right. But yeah, that was an interesting note right up our alley. I was playing Immaculate Grid as I do every day. There was an all-star category, so I try to get the lowest possible similarity score or rarity score, whatever it is, as I think a lot of probably our listeners do. And I was just trying to figure out who I could use for a low score. And I was coming up with names. I don't think it was tied to a team. I don't remember exactly what it was tied to, but I came up with names Delino DeShields, Brett Butler, Otis Nixon. These guys have never appeared in an all-star game.
Oh, wow.
Those 3 players. And I did just realize this literally as I said that those are all leadoff base stealing guys who I tend to place more value on. And maybe that's why I was shocked. But I would have thought one of them would have been a replacement or something.
One time or something.
Yeah,
that's
but
amazing.
No. Because we've talked about Kirk Gibson never being an all-star, but that's because he was never voted in and he always declined when they asked him to come. I was kind of shocked.
Weird.
All right, that's going to do it for our BP segment. Mark, we have got a guest, as we have talked about earlier. There's a returning guest, Brad Balukjian, who, if you remember, a couple of years back wrote The Wax Pack, which our lawyers are still in discussion with him about the legality of that name, where he opened up a pack of 1986 Topps and went and visited and tried to get an update on the players that were in that pack. Some were very successful, some were not. Carlton Fisk and Vince Coleman and some other. But Brad, just like you and I, Mark, baseball fan, wrestling fan.
Yep.
And so he thought, hey, what can I do? What's the next thing I do? And so he remembered this card of a wrestling match that I believe he went to, right? In Madison Square Garden in New York?
I believe so, yeah.
So he tracked down a good deal of the people that were in this match. And he's got a new book out. It's called The Six Pack. And Mark, you and I have both had a chance to read it, and it was very different than The Wax Pack, but just equally as good on a whole different subject.
Yeah, I absolutely loved that book.
Yeah, I know you really, really liked it. And we had a chance to talk with Brad. He came and joined us once again, and we're going to get that. And guess what? We also opened up some baseball cards with him. So we've been wanting to do a wrestling episode for quite a long time. Mark and I have both spoken about it since we first started. We're both longtime wrestling fans. We drop a lot of wrestling references as well into our show. There's some baseball wrestling crossovers that we have not yet covered. So who better than you, Brad Balukjian, to join us once again to talk about all things baseball and wrestling? We've had you on before to talk about your baseball-related book, The Wax Pack, and now your latest book, The Six Pack. Both Mark and I have read it, and I have to say, I love how you don't really fit into the norm. Your favorite baseball player is Don Carmen, and your favorite wrestler is the Iron Sheik. Now, not a lot of people have those two on their bingo card, but welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, guys. And yeah, no, I'm all about the underdogs, unsung heroes. That from a young age, I knew I liked Don Carmen. I knew I liked Marty Barrett, another wrestler. I know I liked the Iron Sheik. Back in the mid 80s when it wasn't cool to cheer for the heels. And even, there were always like those cool bad guys like Jake the Snake Roberts and Rowdy Roddy Piper that eventually were so popular they became good guys. But in 1985, there were not many people in the Providence Civic Center cheering for the Iron Sheik, and I was maybe the only one.
Now, I joked with you when we were setting this up that you were free to wear your Iron Sheik wrestling boots if you wanted to.
Right.
I was really thinking, there is no more iconic footwear. We don't talk about footwear a whole lot.
It's not implausible that I would have those for sure. In fact, I don't have Iron Sheik boots, but the WWE did this documentary like Hidden Treasures where they spent a whole episode trying to find who had the Iron Sheik's boots from, I think, his boot camp match with Sergeant Slaughter. So it's a thing. There's someone out there that many people probably that have pairs of his boots, because I know that he didn't have any of them anymore. When I saw him, in the book in 2022, I think really all he had left from his career was his Persian clubs, which I snapped a picture of them. They were in his bedroom, still there, but he doesn't really have his ring gear anymore. He sold it off over the years.
So before we get too far into this, let's talk about the book. I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with your first book about baseball, where you opened up a pack of baseball cards and went and visited these people. Some of them we like to make fun of, like Carlton Fisk and Vince Coleman, which you had some good stories with. How did you decide who you were going to go see in this book when it came to wrestling?
Right. Well, that was the challenge, was how do you match the wax pack, right? Because that's like the perfect device for the book. This random, take a pack, you get 15 guys, 15 chapters in a book. It was perfect. The randomness of who's going to be in there, the fact that I always liked the underdog, the bench warmers more than the stars. And so in a given pack of cards, probably 12 to 13 are not going to be star players, right? So I knew that from the beginning. With the 6-pack, I knew I had this incredible backstory with the Iron Sheik, where I had known him personally. We had worked on a book together back in 2005 that went totally sideways, and that kind of kicks off this book, the 6-pack. But how I didn't want to just write an Iron Sheik biography. I wanted to do kind of the wax pack treatment. And so what I settled on was guys that performed on the December 26, 1983 Madison Square Garden card, where the Iron Sheik became the champion of the WWF. And so there are 6 guys that I tracked down from that card, plus Hulk Hogan, because he comes in and wins the championship a month later, and Vince McMahon, because he's the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain.
I got to say, I really, really enjoyed this book. I read a lot.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, no, I'm not a literary critic by any stretch of the imagination, but I do read a lot. And I could not put this down. I'm a huge wrestling fan. Rowdy Roddy Piper's my guy. But I had a buddy whose favorite wrestler was the Iron Sheik. So
Really? Okay.
Yeah, no kidding. And I also big on the heels. Love the bad guys. I was the one kid at school that wasn't rooting for Hulk Hogan.
Right.
I wanted Piper and Paul Orndorff and all the rest.
Man, Orndorff was so good back then.
I see the reviews also from other professional wrestlers and Eric Bischoff and so on, all positive. So I want to encourage our listeners to get this book. It is absolutely worth the read.
Thank you. And obviously I hope they get it too. The thing about this business is, like, people ask me, "Oh, are you going to do a third pack book?" And, and I would love to do more. But it's all contingent on people supporting this kind of work, right? Because you're only in publishing. It's a really hard business, and it's not a glamorous, life to write books. But if people buy them, I can have a justification for doing another one. So I hope people check it out.
I hear that the wax pack is in production of a possible movie or something. I'm assuming that we would have a small cameo or.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because just to give an update on that, there's a screenwriter who wrote Trouble with the Curve with Clint Eastwood, who loves the wax pack. He's the guy that is working on treatment of adapting it. And I'm encouraged by what he's doing. His name is Randy. And it's interesting, though, in that process, like how much it changes, right? So he's because the Wax Pack, you can't just directly adapt it. Just like Moneyball, I read the book, I loved it. I was like, that can never be a movie. But then it becomes a great movie, but it changes so much, right? And so it's funny because Randy, the screenwriter, he's like, well, I think we're going to have you like be engaged in the beginning of the movie, and all these different little tweaks, and it's funny to see what they do to alter it.
You're engaged, and then it gets broken off. But Carlton Fisk stops his round of golf to come.
Carlton Fisk is the best man at my wedding. Yeah.
Maybe it could be. I can't think of his real name, but Sergeant Slaughter.
Bob Remus. Yeah.
Yes.
Bob Remus and Carlton Fisk. Yeah, walking down the aisle. Yeah.
If you don't get that reference, go back and listen to our first show where Brad was on, where we go through the travels to get some of those guys from the Wax.
Well, and it's similar in this book. In some ways, Sergeant Slaughter is the Carlton Fisk of this book to some extent. So
pretty much, yeah, I thought that same thing. What's funny is in 21, he actually did a local, like in Puyallup, Washington, did a toy fair. And was there in person, and I didn't go, and now I really wish I had.
Right.
I didn't know he was that elusive, and fun.
So I didn't know Mark's favorite wrestlers. So obviously with you've got the Iron Sheik. Who else was in the pantheon of Brad's favorite wrestlers growing up?
I always liked, who I liked was Rick Martel. I don't know if that name rings a bell with you guys, but something about Rick Martel, I felt like he was like an underrated. He was a star. He was a good guy and popular, but never maybe got the acclaim that he deserved.
Did he go by the model Mick?
He had that gimmick as the model Rick Martel. Yeah, but I liked him when the tag teams with Tom Zenk, the Can-Am Connection, and then he and Tito Santana, who's in the Six Pack, were Strike Force, and their battles with Demolition. Demolition was a great tag team, and they're in Demolition. Axe is one of the guys in the book, and it was fun to talk to him.
Yeah, I loved the Tito Santana stuff because when I first got into wrestling, where I grew up, WWF at that point and AWA were all I got to see when I was first getting into wrestling. And watching WWF at that point, to me, listening to Vince McMahon and Gorilla Monsoon, who were doing the commentary at that point, Tito Santana was this legend. Although he was in kind of the prime of his career, but I've always kind of put him on a pedestal just because that, as a small child, he was kind of the consummate professional wrestler.
Right. And it's funny, that just made me think about that with the commentary is I actually got a lot as a kid out of, like, Gorilla Monsoon and Vince McMahon used a lot of good vocabulary in their commentary. Like, I learned a lot of words, not that I should maybe credit my writing career to their commentary, but like, they would use this really kind of sophisticated verbiage in their commentary, and Gorilla had all his expressions, but a lot of them were like, pretty good SAT words and stuff. And so I actually got a good little education from watching wrestling.
And then you would have the pay-per-views and Jesse Ventura would come on, and then that would just flush all that away.
I don't think there's ever been as good a heel commentator as Jesse Ventura. Like, his play off of Vince McMahon is brilliant. If you go back and watch those old, like, Saturday Night's Main Events, Jesse was so entertaining in that role.
Yeah. You know what? I had the opportunity to meet Jesse Ventura last year, and I commented really quickly to him, by the way, man, you're the greatest wrestling commentator of all time. Yeah. And, when you say something like that, you just expect, oh, yeah, right. But Jesse looked me right in the eye and said, thank you.
Yeah. And for someone like Jesse, he believes that, and he's probably right. And I think he really appreciates that compliment.
He talked to me for about 45 minutes. Oh, wow. It was spectacular. He used to wrestle like in the Northwest, and I saw him and Jimmy Snuka win the tag team titles from Rip Oliver and Playboy Buddy Rose.
Sure. Well, Jesse Ventura, he was one of the few guys to stand up to Vince McMahon. Yeah. And that's a theme in my book. Is one of the things, I interview the wrestlers, obviously, but also a lot of the guys that worked in the front office and behind the scenes for the WWF in the mid-'80s, like the magazine editor, Ed Raschuti, the publisher, Tom Emanuel, the head of TV, Nelson Sweglar, Jim Troy, who was the senior vice president of Titan Sports. And pretty much all these guys across the board agreed that they didn't have very favorable things to say about Vince as a person, in terms of, brilliant businessman, but not a great guy.
Right.
And I think that the reason why Vince McMahon and Jesse were always at each other's throats was because Jesse wouldn't back down from Vince. And so, Jesse's always been a very independently minded guy, very, assertive and standing up for the workers. Mm-hmm. And Vince didn't like that. Vince wants control. Vince wanted to always have the upper hand on these guys.
Right.
So you've got, I've seen, I think it was on your social media feed, it sounds like you're going to be on Eric Bischoff's podcast.
Yes.
82 Weeks. And he was very helpful, you said, in the book as well. And I love Eric Bischoff because I think I was actually thinking recently, who is the best management heel? Is it Vince McMahon or is it Eric Bischoff? Because they both were, and at the same time, kind of competing against each other too. They were both such great, I guess, enemy of most wrestling fans, the common man. I'm excited to listen to that because I enjoy his podcast.
No, Eric was very helpful. I met him actually talking about the Wax Pack. I had contacted him to see because I knew he had produced a bunch of TV and movies, and I really disliked listening. When I listened to his podcast, I just liked the way his brain worked. And so I thought maybe he's interested in the Wax Pack and adapting it. And so we talked about that, and then that eventually led into the Six Pack. And Eric was super helpful with getting me in touch with some wrestlers and has continued to be incredibly supportive and generous with his time. And I think he was a great character. I think the difference to me between Eric and Vince is that Eric is a lot more healthy in terms of understanding, separating the character from the person. And Vince, I think the Mr. McMahon character was not that far off from the real Vince McMahon.
Yeah, I loved the Bischoff character back in the NWO days. It was a lot of fun. Still, I didn't like everybody in the NWO, but I did enjoy Bischoff and Hollywood Hogan and the like.
Yeah, well, to answer your question, Jeff, I did like Hogan as a kid, which might be weird that I liked Iron Sheik and Hulk, and I would choose Iron Sheik over Hulk, but I was definitely a Hulkamaniac, and so maybe that's a little off-brand with my usual underdog thing, but something about Hulk as a kid, he just had that charisma that drew so many. He was that superhero. And I think what is underappreciated about Hulk's performance is he really expressed vulnerability in a way that I think made him so popular, because it wasn't that he was always in control and winning, right? He would just get beaten on, and he would sell really well. And I think that vulnerability that Hulk was able to portray, and in his connection with the audience, which I think in the book I get into where that comes from and how important music was for that. And that really, I think Hulk was who he was as a character because he was a successful musician first, and he knew how to read a crowd. And it's kind of ironic that he maybe had a harder time breaking into wrestling than the other guys in the book who were legitimate athletes in high school or college, like Bill Eadie and Tito Santana and Bob Remus and Iron Sheik as a wrestler, as an amateur wrestler. And Hulk wasn't. So he had a hard time getting in, but he gets the last laugh because he ultimately kind of transforms the whole industry, right? Because he brings it to this entertainment level by doing the ear cupping and the ripping the shirt and all that.
And I gotta say, to this day, when I hear Real American, that song is absolutely one of the things that will perk my ears up, and I will listen to the whole thing.
I just drove cross country, and I admit, on my Spotify, I put on Real American a few times, and I was like, dun, 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 dun. You know?
I used to listen to that cassette over and over again. Great stuff.
Yeah.
I thought it was cool, Brad, that you took a few bumps yourself. What was that like?
Yeah. I thought it was important so one difference between this book and this Wax Pack is this book's a little less of my personal story, right? Like I don't go into my relationship with my parents or my romantic relationships really in this book, but I still wanted to have some of that element of that participatory journalism that I had in the Wax Pack. And certainly I'm the narrator on the road and everything. But one chapter, in which I also go into the history of pro wrestling, like where did it come from? When did it become what it is today? I thought it was important for that chapter to know what it actually felt like to go into a ring and hit the ropes and take a bump. So I did a 1-day training class in New Jersey. And man, I'm glad I did that, because it is rough. That ring is not a trampoline. Having taken very basic bumps, I was like, now if I was being picked up and power slammed or power bombed by a 280-pound guy, even if you are landing correctly, the pounding that your body's going to take, it's no surprise that so many of these guys have back issues and hip replacements because of, and even hitting the ropes. Like the day after, there was a bruise under my arms by my armpits from hitting, because those ropes, they're not rubber bands. They're like steel cable wrapped in garden hose, covered by tape. So they're hard. You don't just give. And I think because these guys, I mean, I'm 170 pounds. So when I hit the ropes, like it barely moves. Right. But so like the bigger guys, maybe that's why it moves a little more. But if you're not that big, it definitely, you feel it. But that was really important for me to convey to the reader, just a sense of respect for how hard this business is. So thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about baseball, which is what we do all the time here, and wrestling, because there is definitely a connection between these two. Let's start out with the Iron Sheik, because it seems to me the Iron Sheik was a bit of a baseball fan and a bit of a Blue Jays fan. Did you ever talk baseball with him? I
don't know that so the Iron Sheik, he did watch a lot of TV, and he would, especially like when I was spending the most time with him was in 2005 in Fayetteville, Georgia, and I would go over to his house, and he loved watching Friends, and he loved watching Rachel Ray, which was kind of funny. He was a big news junkie. He always wanted to know, like he really cared about what was happening in the world. And he wouldn't, you'd ask him about baseball or sports or current events. He wouldn't really want to get into his opinions. Like he was actually pretty reluctant to express strong, which is ironic given that he was on, his sort of Howard Stern persona going crazy and everything, but that was like mostly a work, right? That was him in character pretty much. But he would, if he just average day at home, he wouldn't like express these strong feelings about current events or even sports. But I think he always had, he didn't talk about baseball specifically, but he always was, I think, he had a fondness for the American pop culture that was there when he first came to the U.S. in 1969. So he loved like John Wayne. He loved old movies like that. And I think that's because those formative years, he comes to the U.S. from Iran in 1969, not speaking any English. And he goes to, night school in Minnesota to earn his GED. And, I saw these notebooks that he had where he was practicing his English. He would watch Sesame Street and, he would be practicing his words. And, it's kind of for a guy that had reached the levels of success and fame that he did, to see the evidence of this guy well before he was the Iron Sheik, who just Khosrow Vaziri, a amateur wrestler from Iran that defects to the U.S., just trying to learn English and trying to scrape by. It was kind of a window into a guy that really worked hard to assimilate in the country here.
Well, I went through some of his social media. And
oh boy,
there's a lot to unpack there, but there is some absolute baseball related stuff here. June 22nd, 2020. This is during COVID and baseball, 60 game season. He tweets, "Baseball is back, jabronis." Then there is a MLB posted a top 10 third baseman right now list. And absent from this list is Matt Chapman, which is kind of weird. Mm-hmm. But in all caps, he tweets in reply, "You jabronis don't show the intelligent Matt Chapman, Bubba."
Right. Well, so I mean, the thing about this is, and I don't want to burst your bubble, Jeff, but he didn't actually control his own Twitter. So he had his handlers doing that, and they're from Canada. So they're showing the Toronto Blue Jay bias.
Funny.
Right. So I think a lot of that is the Iron Sheik's PR machine, going into business on his behalf. But I don't think the Iron Sheik was actually sitting there like dissecting Matt Chapman's war.
So he does have, I did find a video of him, which again he might have been coached on this, but when Jim Joyce in 2010 blew the call at first base for Armando Galarraga's what should have been perfect game, he made a very, I'm not going to be able to play it because as you can imagine, he uses some choice language, a 30-second video explaining that he did not enjoy that call and thought it was pretty bunk, which I don't know. Anytime the Iron Sheik's going to say anything about baseball, it's going to be great.
Yeah. No, I mean, of course, that's very entertaining. But again, I guarantee you that was like him with those guys in Canada. And, that was that period in the late 2000s when he was doing all that stuff on Howard Stern and everything. Like, I'm not a huge fan of all that because it really was, I think, him being exploited to some extent. And he was deep into the drug addiction. And, I think the Iron Sheik he liked being popular. And so he was just doing more of what people said they wanted to hear. But that's not really who Khosrow Vaziri is. And that really is what this book's all about, right? Is to what extent did each person become their character? And that is, that happens pretty easily in wrestling, especially that era in wrestling when they were still expected to protect the business as being legitimate sport.
So this is somebody I had not heard of as either a wrestler or a baseball player, but Bobo Brazil. He's a WWE Hall of Famer. Also used to play for the Black House of David. And we've talked about the House of David as well as the Black House of David here on this show many times before. He is often referred to as the Jackie Robinson of professional wrestling, as he was one of the first professional. There's not a lot of wrestlers that actually played baseball professionally, other than obviously Macho Man, Randy Poffo.
Yeah, Randy Poffo, Macho Man Randy Savage,
yeah, who played for the Gulf Coast Cardinals, hit .286 over 35 games his first year. But nobody really believed that he was going to be much of a prospect. But I did find that there was a brawl in 1974 that he was involved in. And the Tampa Tribune ultimately said what they said in the kind of recap the next day is that he thought he was some kind of macho man out on the field during this fight.
Wow.
And he liked that, and believe it or not, it stuck.
Wow.
So
that's cool. But there's a new book coming out right when mine comes out the first Macho Man biography by a guy named John Finkel. And so I haven't read it yet, but I wonder if he'll touch on that in there.
When I was in the minors, actually, just to show you that baseball continued in Randy's life, he made an appearance at the Tacoma Tigers game with Elizabeth and signed autographs. And he just really seemed to enjoy watching the ball game and being a part of it again. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah.
Some other names, baseball related, that have to do with wrestling. Of course, there's Pete Rose. Who, I wish it still happened at every WrestleMania where either Undertaker or Kane would choke slam him at some point. Also, Bob Uecker.
Yeah, that was great, yeah.
Bob Uecker was, I think it was WrestleMania 1 or 2. It was one of those ones where there were satellite events at different arenas.
Yeah, Bob Uecker did a lot of stuff in early WrestleManias. There's an interview where Andre the Giant chokes him out.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah, it's iconic. The big old hands around his neck.
And Uecker does such a great job of selling it too with the face, and it's kind of what you expect.
Bob Costas and Regis and Bob Uecker, like those guys, they loved the wrestling in those early WrestleManias. They were doing a lot of crossover there.
This is a name I didn't know had anything to do with wrestling, but Warren Cromartie. So Warren Cromartie, one of the names of the young Expos outfielders who then went on to have a very successful career in Japan. Very famous clip of him charging the mound when in Japan that just doesn't really happen. But in 2007, he joined up on a tag team, Japanese wrestling event for charity, and he took down the legendary Indian wrestler Tiger Jeet Singh.
Really? I had no idea about that. Wow.
They called it a home run chop, where he had a folding chair, because that's what you do in wrestling, and he essentially hit him like he was swinging a baseball bat with it, and then let out a bonsai cheer and got the win.
Wow.
And somebody that we do know about, Dale Torborg, Jeff Torborg's son.
Right.
He was Kiss Demon in WCW, which was when Kiss was branding anything they could. I mean, they still do, let's be honest, but that wasn't a great success. But still, Dale Torborg's done a lot of things in wrestling and also in baseball. One of which is in 2006, David Eckstein and AJ Przinsky had a bit of a feud, where I think they came out as friends, and then Przinsky took Eckstein's book and ripped all the pages out, and then they got on. And that was simply a work just to get on ESPN, to get brand awareness of Impact, and it worked. They got on ESPN, and that was it. But I mean, also baseball players love wrestling, right? I mean, every clubhouse now has a title belt. Josh Reddick is a huge wrestling fan.
Josh Reddick, yeah. I know that of the guys that I talked, Hulk Hogan was really into baseball as a kid. I mean, he played Little League, and he was known for hitting these these giant home runs. And I think, he's appeared at spring training in Clearwater and maybe with the Tampa Bay Rays. So I think Hulk has always liked baseball. The other guys, I'm trying to think, no one jumps to mind that I interviewed with. Jose Luis Rivera, who is the least known. He's kind of the Jaime Kokenauer of the six pack. I flew to Puerto Rico to hang out with him and kind of tell his story. And in Puerto Rico, baseball is huge. So when I was there, Jose Luis, he has a young son. He's probably 11 or 12 now. And he was huge into baseball and was going to baseball practices every day. So I think baseball is a big part of their lives in Puerto Rico. I know that Tony Schiavone, who's an announcer, was, I think, a commentator for Atlanta Braves organization, one of the minor league teams. So there's definitely some guys that are into it.
I enjoyed the chapter on Jose Luis Rivera. I thought that was pretty cool. Not everybody knows who that guy is, but he was a spectacular wrestler. The chapter about Tony Atlas, I don't want to give away too much, but just a tragic story, but with a decent ending. What was that like, hanging out with him and the life that he was living?
Well, Tony is such a gregarious guy. He was maybe the most, when I think about in the Wax Pack and the Six Pack, who was the most fun guy to hang out with, right? And in the Wax Pack, it was probably Randy Reddy, because the guy was just so positive and so fun and outgoing and easy to be around. And I think Tony Atlas is probably that guy in the Six Pack, because just, we went to the YMCA in Lewiston, Maine, and he trains people and also works out. And I did a workout with him, and man, Tony Atlas, he got me to bench press 225 pounds. I've never bench pressed 225 pounds. It was pretty, all through his psychology of, sort of how he approached the mental part of things like weightlifting. And he was a Mr. USA, so he knows what he's talking about.
Right.
But just to watch Tony he's been up in that community for 30 some years, and just to watch him go around and talk to people, and we go into a restaurant and someone pays for his lunch and he takes a picture, and the community knows him. The youth there know him. He's got just this just really likable demeanor that you can just tell he just gets a lot of joy out of people. And so I really enjoyed tagging around with him for a couple of days, in his life, kind of seeing his daily life.
I really enjoyed the chapter on Tito Santana as well. Yeah.
And Tito, go ahead.
Oh, and just another iconic wrestler from my youth. And Jeff mentioned him earlier.
Right. And thematically, when you only have a chapter, whether it's Dwight Gooden or Hulk Hogan or Tito Santana, you have one chapter to write about a guy. You have to make some hard choices, and you have to know, well, what do I want to focus on? Right. And I mean, in all these stories, I'm focusing more on the humanity than the baseball or the wrestling. So not going into Tito Santana wanting to ask about, winning the Intercontinental belt. That story's been told. It's interesting for a wrestling fan, but I write these books for a broader audience. And so with Tito, Merced Solis is his real name. I was mostly interested in his relationship with his father, which was a pretty strained one, and his own sons, which was a good one, kind of echoing the father-son relationship theme in the Wax Pack. And then this notion of this story of him having a daughter he didn't know about, and how that kind of, really rocked his world to discover just a few years ago that he had a daughter, and what the impact of that on his family and his marriage. And, challenging. I mean, I think Tito Merced Solis had, to some extent, become that virtuous character of Tito Santana, and maybe even to the point of thinking that he was different from everyone else and that he lived this very virtuous, life. And yet even Merced Solis is not, he makes mistakes just like everyone does. And so to talk about having him sort of being humbled a little bit by that experience of learning about the daughter was part of showing his character. But ultimately it's showing that he is human. Tito Santana is not human. Tito Santana is a two-dimensional, larger than life, good guy, babyface character that should be all those things. But Merced Solis is a human being, and no human being is all virtuous, right? And so that's kind of what I wanted to get across there.
Yeah, interesting, because even in real life, he was no steroids guy. He was. You talk about the Tito Santana. Was it the Tito way? Or something?
People called it the Tito thing. Yeah, like the wrestlers were envious. Oh, Tito, he's a family man. He's not making all the mistakes everyone else makes.
Right.
And I think Merced bought into that a lot. And then and he was those things, but he also made mistakes too.
I was going to say, kind of echoes Steve Garvey as a player. When, I remember somebody said he would go out back just to chew gum. He had this all-American,
right, just
perfect persona on the field. And then you find out what goes on off the field. But that was real life. That wasn't a character.
Well, because we fall in love with the characters. Whether we're talking about baseball or wrestling, we fall in love with Steve Garvey, the 300 hitter or whatever. We fall in love with Mike Schmidt, the 548 home runs, right? We don't fall in love with the person, but there is a person behind each of these athletes or wrestlers. And that's really what these books are about, is getting to know the person, which is different from the character.
And so let me ask you this. So they often say, don't meet your heroes. Now you've become friends with Don Carmen. You've become friends with the Iron Sheik. Do you think that holds true?
I think there's an inevitable loss that happens when you meet your heroes. But if you can get past that, you can also build something new and different as a relationship with those people. So I think there's going to be inevitable disappointment, because these are real people, not characters. And yet, once you get past that, you can still, like, my friendship with Don Carmen now is different from my sort of at a distance relationship with him as my hero. But I would argue that the friendship I have with him now is more substantial than whatever it was before, because it's real. It's recognizing that this is not that no hero is everything you want them to be, but in a way that, it's almost like you have to redefine heroism, right? Like the new definition of heroism is maybe that person is flawed. There is vulnerability there, and they're heroic because of their honesty and being forthcoming, and not because of the fact that they did something on a baseball field.
That really does wrap it up really well. I couldn't agree with you more. And the book is really about, it's stories, but it's a book about humanity as well, and about relating to the people out there that you see on TV, instead of just the character that you see, that there are real people deep inside, and the person that plays the character is far more interesting than the character.
So, Brad, to wrap up here, my final question for you. if you were a professional wrestler, what's your gimmick?
Well, I kind of posted that in the chapter where I go in the ring, where I say, as a kid, I was exciting Balukjian was my stage name, which is a terrible stage name. So I was anything but exciting. I think it'd be the most fun to be. This is a fun game to play with your friends. The next time you're all hanging out is like go around the room and say, hey, would that person be a heel or a baby face? Like, because it's sort of like you do the thing where, are you more of a cat or a dog personality wise? Well, some of your friends, do you think that you could see them? They're definitely going to be a heel, right? And that guy would be a baby face. I think I would enjoy being a heel manager. That would be a fun, because I'm, a pretty slight guy, but I could, work the microphone probably. So
that was going to be my follow-up.
Bobby the Brain.
Yeah, Bobby the Brain's my favorite heel manager of all time. But I was going to say, who is your manager?
Oh, who would manage me, or who do I like that's been a manager?
Who would you want to manage you?
I'm going to go a different direction here. I want Mr. Fuji.
Nice.
Just with that having the cane and, like Mr. Fuji, I feel like he was different from the other managers, that he was a wrestler, a really successful wrestler first. So he was a tough guy. So just when you think, well, poor Mr. Fuji, he would come out and bash you with that cane.
So any idea you've got, I mean, I know this book is just coming up. You've got baseball, you've got wrestling. If you've got to complete this trilogy and somebody puts you on the spot right now, what is it?
There's a few. I have a football idea. I have a boxing idea. I have a hockey idea. There's a lot of possibilities for that. In the meantime, though, just to put it out there in the short term. So on April 2nd, this book comes out, but I'm also launching the Brad Pack, thebradpack.com, which is my new website. And there I think the baseball listeners will appreciate this too. I'm going to have a new content being posted. So I'll have all this bonus content from the 6-pack where I only used 5% of the material that I collected, but I have all this additional audio and documents that I found that is sort of like the deleted scenes or special features of a DVD, right? We're going to put all that on the Brad Pack. And then I'm going to start doing some new segments with new interviews. So I have a segment that's going to be called Baseball Seasons, where I have pick 1 year, one team, like the 85 Phillies, and do new interviews with ranging from the players to the minor leaguers to the beat writers from that time, the front office people, and have a way to have new content regularly beyond just doing the books.
Sounds like a little bit of infringement on what we do, but we'll keep an eye on it. We do cover seasons every now and then. Okay. We'll cover a specific team So, we'll keep our eye on it.
All right.
We shouldn't be expecting a book on soap opera stars then.
The soap pack. Yeah, it doesn't quite.
Soap on a rope.
I'm glad to hear that.
I was going to suggest maybe you interview stormtroopers. You can get the guy that bumped his head. You can
the Star Wars extras. Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah, I'm a big Star Wars fan, so that'd be fun.
That's why you fit in so well here.
So before we open this pack of baseball cards, do you want to tell everybody the best way to get this book and your previous book and the Brad Pack? I'm excited for that.
Sure. Yeah. It's April 2nd, launch day, as they say, wherever books are sold. I always like to push for the independent stores, the local bookstores, but you can get it online on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of those places. And then I'm on Twitter at Brad Pack Books, Instagram at Brad Pack Books, and then thebradpack.com is the website.
And when is that launching?
Same day as the book,
Same day?
April 2nd. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you remember back to your first appearance here, we do something on this show that we like to call Wax Pack Heroes. What we're going to do, we're going to open up a pack of baseball cards. In this case, it's a 1990 Donruss. So beautiful cards. I'm sure they're worth a lot.
That was like the red year, right?
That's right.
I think so, yeah. And what we do is we total up the baseball reference WAR from the year of the card. So in this case, 1990. But we've got a couple of things that can either add or subtract to that total. And then we've got a leaderboard. Now, on our old, I believe when you were on the first time, we were doing this a little bit differently, where we actually were looking up, we had an old Beckett's, and we would look up the price of the cards. And not a big total, but you scored very high. You are actually, if we look back at our Beckett's scoreboard, you were in second place behind former Tampa Bay Ray Richie Schaefer.
Oh, wow. Good company.
What we're doing here, though, is we're using the Baseball Reference War, and you're going to be the first person on this new list. So
okay,
you're gonna be number one after this regardless. But what we're going to do is we are going to, this has got, let's see, 16 cards in here. So we're going to ask you for 5 numbers. We're going to pull, if you say number 3, we're going to pull the third card. We'll look at the Baseball Reference War. What we say is any 80s baseball aesthetics. So no batting gloves, a good mustache, flip down sunglasses, eye black, real stirrups, anything like that is going to get you an extra 1/10 of a point. If they're wearing 2-in-1 stirrups, that's a minus 1/10 of a point because that's we don't.
So I'm not guessing their war. We're just going to look up what their war was.
We're just going to look up their war, and if we remember anything about them, talk about them. If they won an award that year, they get an extra 1/2 a point. If there's a Hall of Famer on the card, whether it's the Focus or not, Ripken's at second and they're sliding in, that's a whole extra point. And
are we doing career war or just that season?
Just that season.
Okay, so like 1989 or 1990?
1990.
Okay.
And then the final bonus is any pop culture references. And if they happen to have appeared on either The Simpsons, Seinfeld, or surprisingly enough, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which had quite a few major leaguers on that, you get a whole extra point for those.
All right.
But if they were suspended or listed in the Mitchell report, that is a minus 1/2 a point. So we got some things that can take or add or subtract. So we've got 16 cards here. Give me a number between 1 and 16 for your first card.
Let's do 5. My favorite number.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So you've got a Philadelphia Philly.
Oh, look at that. My favorite team.
I'm sure he was a teammate of Don Carmen. It is Tommy.
Bruce Ruffin.
No, it's Tommy Herr.
Tommy Herr, second baseman. Yeah. He famously had like 100 RBIs, but only like 9 home runs in like 1984 or 6 or something.
Well, that's 110 RBI and 8 home runs.
Yeah. What a stat line.
Well, it's led the league with 13 sacrifice flies that year. I mean, that's a great year to knock in that many runs with only 8 home runs.
That's got to be up there with like lowest ratio of home runs to RBIs ever, right?
That probably is, yeah. Let's see, in 1990, he split time. He started the year with the Phillies and then was traded to the Mets. Overall, let's see, he hit 261, a 324 on base, 5 home runs, 60 RBI. So still kind of a low home run to RBI ratio. 7 stolen bases. And overall, that is a overall WAR of minus 0.1. He was in the positive in Philadelphia.
Was he just really bad defensively?
Well, with Philadelphia in 119 games, he had a 0.3 WAR, which isn't great. But yeah, I mean, I guess the defense probably played into that. But then he was traded to the Mets, and in 27 games, it was a minus 0.4. So that's where he took the hit. So it's going to be a minus 0.1 to start out with. He does have eye black in this picture, so that'll take you right out there to even. Let's see, overall for Tommy, he played 13 years in the big leagues, 10 with the Cardinals, 2 with the Mets, 2 with the Phils, and then parts of season with Minnesota and San Francisco. No real interesting. Well, he was traded for Tom Brunansky. That's how the Twins got Bruno. It helped them out in the World Series. Let's see if there's any sort of pop culture references or anything here. I don't see anything. So Tommy Herr has started you out with an even score of 0.
Okay.
Which, I mean, it could be worse.
It's better than a negative.
Yeah, it could be worse. All right. So give me another number between 1 and now 15.
Let's go 8.
All right. Well, this is good news for you. You've got a Hall of Famer.
Ooh.
We've done an entire episode on just one game that he played. Second baseman for the Chicago Cubs from Spokane, Washington. It's Ryan Sandberg.
All right. Ryan Sandberg. That was always one of those surreal pinch me moments when I was riding in Rick Sutcliffe's car and his phone rang and Ryan S came up on his cell phone.
Nice.
And he didn't answer it. I'm like, oh, wow. Ryan Sandberg got screened for me.
Well, this was not his 19 triple year, unfortunately, which is my favorite year.
Famously traded by the Phillies, right?
Yep, played 13 games for the Phillies. I used him in Immaculate Grid the other day for the Phillies Cubs, and I was shocked that it was a very low score. In 1990, good news for you, All-Star year. Also won a Gold Glove. I mean, he was an All-Star for 10 consecutive years. Won a Gold Glove, came in 4th in the MVP balloting. So this is going to be a big score for you here.
Yeah.
155 games, led the league with 116 runs scored, led the league with 40 home runs.
Wow.
100 RBI, hit 306, 354 on base, led the league with 344 total bases, 22 stolen bases.
Wow.
And overall, that is good for a WAR of 7.1.
Wow, what a year.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see, I think that was his, actually, it was his third best WAR year. He had a 7.8 in 92, and then that MVP season in 84, he had an 8.5. Now, the good news for you, additionally here, obviously he's a Hall of Famer, so you'll get a whole extra point there. In this picture, he has got real stirrups on. Yes. So that'll be a 10th of a point. Let's take a vote here. The Cubs have got pullover jerseys here and Sansa pants. I'm not sure there's more of an 80s aesthetic than that.
That's big 80s right there.
Yeah.
When did the pullovers stop?
I think the Cubs and the Mets are the last two teams I remember. And I mean, that was early 90s that they stopped with that, I think. I couldn't tell you exactly.
So there was somewhere in the 90s, you had like the end of stirrups, the end of pullovers, and the advent of walk-up music, right? Big changes.
Yeah, I've asked some of our guests, when we do this specifically talking about stirrups, I'm like, what did you wear? Did you wear, just 2-in-1s or did you wear real ones? And most of the time in the big leagues, they would wear the 2-in-1s, and they said just simply because it's easier.
Do any current players do the real stirrups?
Yeah, actually, it's made quite a comeback.
I see more the socks, but not the stirrups themselves.
They're in the minority. Yeah, a lot of people just wear that solid or the stance socks. But yeah, there are good number of people that you can see have got the horseshoes and are wearing real stirrups now, which is great.
Generally, the pants are too long these days to see the stirrups. They wear these long pants and the 80s little short ones with the really cool stirrups and that awesome aesthetic. Yeah.
So I don't see any, I mean, he had to have been in some TV shows or something, but I don't see anything coming up on his Wikipedia, which is generally where we go for just the basic, the basic stuff, unless anything comes to mind. But that did get you an 8.3, which is a very good score.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right. Wow. So you've got 3 cards left.
Okay, let's go to 11.
Okay. Well, this one goes to 11. There's a nice reference.
Oh, is that the Spinal Tap?
Yeah. All right.
Which, by the way, they're shooting a sequel. I just want to throw that in.
I heard about that. Yeah.
All right. So here we go with Atlanta. It is outfielder Tommy Gregg with 2 G's.
Ooh, that's not going to help me much.
All right, let's see. Tommy Gregg, overall 9 years in the big league, 6 with Atlanta, and then the Bucks, the Reds, and the Marlins. In 1990 with Atlanta, played in 124 games.
Wow.
Hit 264, 322 on base, 5 home runs, 32 RBI, and overall that will be a WAR of a positive 0.4. So that's good.
It's hard to believe that he is better than Tommy Herr by WAR.
Yeah. Again, WAR does take into account defense, which is also kind of subjective. Good news for you here. He also has eye black on, so that'll be an extra 10th of a point. Nothing else in this card is going to help you out. Let's see here. Just like to look.
Is there anything hairstyle related that helps?
Well, we don't.
Is that not a category?
It's kind of hard because they're always wearing a hat or a helmet for the most part. So if we get like a Chet Lemon card, certainly we're going to give you.
Okay. All right.
Or who was it? It wasn't Chet Lemon, with the famous Oscar Gamble. There you go. Yeah. If it's an Oscar Gamble card with a pick and the throw out, absolutely. Yeah. The mustache, or if you've got some Brady Anderson like sideburns, we'll count that as
well.
What about
a mullet? That's very 80s.
But again, you can't see the party in front if they're wearing
That's a
hat.
Good point, yeah. They have to be hatless.
Well, I think like the hair in the back coming out, like that's the thing.
Yeah, well, we'll take it into consideration. It's kind of a card by card, what we can see. But surprisingly enough, no pop culture references for Tommy Craig.
Yeah, shocker.
But that does, you did get a point, not a point, but a tenth of a point. So you're up to 8.8 now. You've got 2 cards left.
Let's go with number 12 for my favorite football player, Randall Cunningham.
All right, well, you're going to like this. It's a Philly.
Oh, another Philly.
Jeff Parrott.
Jeff Parrott, yeah. He had a solid beard. Atlanta Braves, right?
Yep.
Setup man.
Also, I remember him with the A's for a little bit of time later in his career. Let's see, Jeff Parrott, 10 years in the big leagues, 3 with the Phillies, 3 with the Expos, 2 apiece for Atlanta, St. Louis, and then 1 with Colorado and the A's. In 1990, he split time again with the Phillies and the Braves. Overall, went 5-10 with a 4.64 ERA, 108 innings, 86 strikeouts, and 84 ERA plus. And that will equal a minus 0.6. So once again here, with the Phillies, before he was traded in 90, he had a 0.6. Or no, I'm sorry, he had a minus 1.2 with the Phillies. And then the Braves said, yes, give us that. But he had a 0.6. So did okay.
Yeah, the Phillies front office was busy in 1990.
Yeah, I think those were at the deadline. They dumped a lot of people. Let's see, at one point was traded with Floyd Yeomans to the Phillies for Kevin Gross. It's the biggest transaction he was involved in. And surprisingly enough, no real pop culture references for Jeff Parrott.
Right.
But he will get the 10th of a point for that beard there. All right. So that's 4 cards. You are down to your last card.
So I can go back to 5?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So you like his first name. I'm not sure you're going to get a whole lot out of the rest of them. Outfielder for the Carmen Castillo.
Oh, I don't even remember Carmen Castillo. No memory.
Not really remembering him either. And this was a point in time when, no, I guess this is a little bit before the Twins AAA club was in Salt Lake. So I don't really remember him either. 10 years in the big leagues, 7 with Cleveland, 3 with Minnesota. What? Yeah. Debuted with Cleveland in 1982 and then wrapped up in 91 with the Twins. Let's see, in 1990, he was probably a 5th outfielder. 64 games, 219 average, 239 on base, no home runs, 12 RBI, and that was good for a 34 OPS plus. That doesn't, and a WAR of -2. Not minus 0.2, but -2.
Wow. That's rough.
Ouch. Yeah. Now, looking at the card itself, does have real stirrups. That's good news. He also has eye black and a mustache. So that'll get you 0.3 of a point. I'm tempted to. He's got the pony spikes on that have the tongue over the laces. I don't know. Is that a 80s baseball aesthetic? Ponies with the lace covers?
I don't know if that was 80s specifically, but I do remember them.
Well, it was the 70s too, but then it went out of style in the 80s. But
I don't need your charity, Jeff.
You don't need it? All right. Well, then let's see. I'm guessing that there's probably not much in the way of pop culture for Carmen Castillo. Yeah, I mean,
this is not like the Buddy Biancalana phenomenon where, you would surprisingly get a huge bump for a lesser known player. But.
Well, a lot of times we find some very disappointing news that they've either passed away or they're in jail for various things. Right. So this is all we could ask for. Is it sounds like he is alive and not in jail. So
okay.
Now, if he had moonlighted as a professional wrestler, I believe that's +10.
Well, now I remember we've talked about this. Kent Herbeck said that if he was not a baseball player, he would have been a professional wrestler nicknamed T-Rex.
I like that.
So I thought he at one point wrestled during the off season. I thought he said he did that once, but I was never able to find, and I've looked it up, never been able to find anything that supports that. So
okay,
but that's an 8.8, that's a 6.6, which is for 5 cards, is a very good. I mean, Rhino did the heavy lifting here, but that's a very good score.
Nice. All right, nice.
So if you want, I can wrap these up and pop them in the mail to you. But I'm guessing.
I think I have all those cards right. I'm in my childhood home here, so they're probably right around the corner.
All right. Well, then we'll just keep them. Yeah, we'll just keep them here with the rest of them. All right. Well, Brad, thank you once again for joining us once again. We will put all of the information where you can get the book and where we can find you on socials. All of that will be in the show notes as well.
All right. Well, thanks for having me back, guys. And it's been fun to chop it up about baseball and wrestling. And good luck with everything.
Great. Thanks again. And good luck with the book.
All right. Take care.
All right, so if I didn't mention it before, we will put all the links where you can get the book, you can join his website, and all that stuff. There is one thing, Mark, I completely forgot. I had this tab pulled up, but I had so many tabs and notes ready to go when we spoke about him. And in the baseball wrestling crossover, I forgot to mention probably the most successful baseball wrestling crossover, and especially the most recent. Do you remember the movie The $1 Million Arm?
Sure.
Yeah. It was based on a true story where there was a reality show in India where they took cricketers and were trying to see if any of them could actually learn to throw a baseball and pitch in the major leagues. And from that, they got 2 guys that came over and ended up signing with the Pittsburgh Pirates, Rinku Singh and Dinesh Patel. Neither of them made it to the big leagues. They languished, I guess would be a good word, in the minor leagues. But Rinku Singh is now a professional wrestler with WWE.
It's awesome.
So he's part of a tag team with another Indian wrestler, and they were or still are called Indus Sher. Now, they wrestle for NXT at the time of this article. I don't know if they're still together, if they're still with NXT, if they're with the WWE in any way, if they're in AEW, if they're independent, whatever. But he has got a full-fledged wrestling career, and I would say a more successful minor league career than Macho Man. So I'm going to have to put him at the top of the list.
That's a good point.
This was interesting, though. I saw when he was pitching, he was 6'3", 190 pounds. He is now up to 266 pounds.
Whoa.
Which is a feat considering he's a vegetarian.
Man, that is a lot of potatoes.
Yeah, he says it's very hard to get enough protein. It's easy back in India, but here in the States, it's not quite as easy to maintain that size as a vegetarian, and I can see why.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I can't imagine not eating meat, but that's just me. All right. So once again, though, thank you, Brad, again for joining us. And Mark, that's going to do it for this show. Let's remind everybody where they can find more of us. We're on all the social medias at 2 Strike Noise. Just do a search for 2 Strike Noise, TWO Strike Noise. You can find us just about anywhere on the social medias, as well as an email address, Mark.
You can write to us at 2 Strike Noise. Again, spell it out, TWO Strike Noise @gmail.com.
All right. Do you think the Honky Tonk Man's going to show up at WrestleMania this year?
I have a feeling he's not.
The Brooklyn Brawler?
No, that would be something.
No, I'm just...
there's lots of rumors about who's going to show up.
Hillbilly Jim. He was one of my favorites.
Hillbilly Jim. Yeah, I forgot about that guy.
Junkyard Dog and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat were my 2 all-time favorites.
Yes, I was a Roddy Piper guy beginning to end.
Yeah, and if you read Brad's book, JYD, away from the ring, he was something. So, yeah, but hit us up on social medias or the email and join us for our next episode of 2 Strike Noise.
Thank you. God bless you. Have a great day.